All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I have the following to say about the situation in Gaza. The Secretary General unequivocally condemns the continued and widespread loss of life in Gaza, including in the Israeli airstrikes in Beit Lahia, which killed dozens of Palestinians, among them many women and children. Civilians must be respected and protected at all times. He remains deeply alarmed by the rapidly deteriorating situation for civilians in northern Gaza, including mass displacement and the lack of essentials for survival. The Secretary General calls for immediate and unhindered access for humanitarian and rescue teams to save lives. The recent attacks that have hit hospitals in North Gaza are exacerbating an already dire humanitarian crisis and placing the lives of tens of thousands at grave risk. Patients and medical staff must be protected. Hospitals must not be targeted. Access to essential medical care and supplies must be prioritized to prevent further loss of life. The violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza by all parties to this conflict are unacceptable. Accountability for any international crimes that have been committed by any party is essential. The Secretary General reiterates his call for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages in Gaza. And Tor Venesland, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, said yesterday that the nightmare in Gaza is intensifying. Nowhere is safe in Gaza, Mr. Venesland said. He condemned the continuing attacks on civilians. This war must end. The hostages held by Hamas must be freed. The displacement of Palestinians must cease, and civilians must be protected wherever they are. Humanitarian aid must be delivered unimpeded, he added. And Joyce Msuya, the acting Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, also drew attention to the appalling news from northern Gaza, where Palestinians continue to endure unspeakable horrors under siege by Israeli forces. These atrocities must stop, she said. Today, our colleagues in the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs report that an urgent request to access the Fallujah area of Jabalia to help those trapped under the rubble was denied by Israeli authorities for the fourth consecutive day. We reiterate once again that these delays are likely costing lives. OCHA says that Israeli authorities also denied a separate request today to have access to Jabalia to distribute food, medicine, and fuel to power water facilities amid the ongoing electricity outage. The fuel needed to keep water facilities running has been depleted, and people are either risking their lives to find drinking water or consuming water from unsafe sources. OCHA warns that almost no humanitarian aid is getting into Jabalia refugee camp, and telecommunications are severely disrupted amid ongoing airstrikes, shelling, and fighting across North Gaza, as the violence displaces more and more people. Between the 6th of October and yesterday, OCHA says the 28 requests for coordinated humanitarian movements into Jabalia, Beit Hanun, and Beit Lahia, all in North Gaza Governorate, were denied by Israeli authorities, and 7 faced impediments. Meanwhile, during the first 20 days of October, only 4 out of 66 planned humanitarian missions through the Israeli checkpoint from southern to northern Gaza was facilitated by Israeli authorities. The Erez West crossing reopened a week ago after closure lasting almost 2 weeks, but collecting supplies remains challenging due to insecurity and long delays. The Israeli authorities are channeling movement from that crossing directly to Gaza City, bypassing North Gaza. Meanwhile, the Erez crossing remains closed. OCHA teams have been able to work in Gaza City. On Saturday, OCHA led a visit to several sites there. They say that shelter support is urgently needed due to overcrowding at existing sites, with some displaced people now living in restrooms. The team also warns that the lack of sufficient lighting in these shelters is raising the risk of gender-based violence. And turning to southern Gaza, we have an update for you on the ongoing polio vaccination campaign. The World Health Organization reports that on the second day of the polio vaccination campaign in the south, nearly 91,000 children received their second dose, with almost 71,000 getting vitamin A supplements. WHO says this brings the total number of children vaccinated since the start of the second round of the campaign to more than 420,000. A high intensity of strikes by Hezbollah into Israel and by the Israeli Defense Forces into Lebanon have continued through the weekend and today. with reports of fatalities in Lebanon. On Sunday, the 20th of October, the UNIFIL peacekeeping mission detected 778 projectiles from south of the Blue Line, primarily striking Yarun, Yater, Hanin, Barkaba, Et Taibe, and Shaba, while 56 projectiles were recorded from north of the Blue Line. From midnight to 1200 hours today, UNIFIL detected 43 projectiles from north to south of the Blue Line and 509 from south to north. UNIFIL also reported 63 violations of Lebanese airspace on the 20th of October. Another incident of concern is that yesterday, peacekeepers reported that an IDF bulldozer deliberately demolished an observation tower and perimeter fence of a UN position in Marwain in Sector West. Fortunately, no UN personnel were wounded in the incident. The mission yet again reminds the IDF and all actors of their obligations to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and property, and to respect the inviolability of UN premises at all times. The mission further notes that breaching a UN position and damaging UN assets is a violation of international law and Security Council Resolution 1701. It also endangers the safety and security of our peacekeepers and is in violation of international humanitarian law. Despite the very challenging situation that persists, peacekeepers remain in their positions. Also, the peacekeeping mission reports that at the request of the Lebanese armed forces, the mission evacuated 3 civilians, one of whom was injured, from Hula, and transported them to a hospital on Saturday. Meanwhile, on the humanitarian front, our colleagues from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that airstrikes across Lebanon continued to kill and injure civilians and displace a growing number of families. Late last night, hundreds of people were reportedly displaced in Beirut and across the country following Israeli displacement orders identifying a social finance network affiliated with Hezbollah, which were soon followed by airstrikes. As a result of one of these airstrikes in the southern suburbs of the capital last night, a UNFPA-supported safe space for women and girls was destroyed, alongside a primary healthcare center. The safe space had provided counseling services, legal aid, and referrals for hundreds of women at risk and survivors of gender-based violence in one of Beirut's most vulnerable communities. In Beirut, Bekaa, and Mount Lebanon, 10 facilities supported by UNFPA, including primary healthcare sites, safe spaces, and mobile maternity units, have closed due to insecurity. Across Lebanon, we and our humanitarian partners continue to provide support, including in harder-to-reach areas. Today, a 6-truck aid convoy, supported by UNICEF, the World Food Program, and OCHA, brought humanitarian supplies to Jaboulet town in Baalbek Governorate. This was the first such delivery since September. The convoy brought enough food supplies to support 1,000 people for 2 months, along with 5 days' worth of ready-to-eat meals. UNICEF provided water bottles, mattresses, blankets, and other items, including first aid and hygiene kits for the 3 shelters in Jaboulet town. Health authorities in Baalbek, as well as Bekaa Governorate, have issued an urgent call for support to strengthen health infrastructure in several hard-to-reach areas. As of this weekend, nearly 1,100 collective shelters have opened in Lebanon, hosting some 192,000 displaced people. More than 900 of these shelters are already at full capacity. The highest percentage of internally displaced people has been recorded in Beirut and Mount Lebanon Governorate. The International Organization for Migration says that more than 800,000 people have been displaced inside Lebanon by escalating hostilities over the past year. Meanwhile, more than 420,000 people have crossed into Syria, according to the UN Refugee Agency, with nearly 17,000 people arriving in Iraq. The Secretary General is in Addis Ababa today, where he took part in the 8th African Union United Nations Annual Conference. The high-level discussions, co-chaired by Moussa Faki Mohammed, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, and the Secretary General, focused on progress in the implementation of cooperation frameworks between the 2 organizations, as well as the operationalization of Security Council Resolution 2719, which establishes the framework for financing of African Union-led peace support operations through UN-assessed contributions. Participants also discussed joint action, as well as challenges linked to peace, security, development, human rights, and the impact of climate change on the African continent. Discussions also included the implementation of the Pact for the Future. During a joint press conference with Moussa Faki Mohammed, the Secretary General highlighted the importance of continued collaboration between the 2 organizations as we begin the implementation of the Pact for the Future. He also paid tribute to the chairperson, who is set to end his mandate in a few months. A short while ago, the Secretary General delivered remarks at the UN Economic Commission for Africa during a ceremony for the inauguration of a renovated Africa Hall. This hall is where Africa came together to give life to the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union, the Secretary General said. This hall is a bridge between Africa's past and future, he added, a state-of-the-art 21st century facility that preserves the grandeur and history of this great continent. His full remarks were shared with you. And while in Addis Ababa, the Secretary General also held meetings with President Saleh Work Zewde and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia. And yesterday, the Secretary General addressed the opening of the 16th meeting of the Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is taking place in Cali, Colombia. And he did that by video message. He said that this is a COP to make peace with nature and added that the global biodiversity framework adopted last year promises to reset relations with the Earth and its ecosystems. We must leave Cali with significant investment in the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund and commitments to mobilize other sources of public and private finance to deliver the framework in full, the Secretary General said. Turning to Ukraine, our colleagues from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs say that attacks have continued in several parts of the country over the weekend and today. Local authorities reported that nearly 90 civilian casualties, including children, and damage to homes, schools, and other civilian facilities in frontline areas of the regions of Dnipro, Donetsk, Kharkiv, Kherson, Odessa, and Zaporizhia. Yesterday, 2 strikes hit a residential area in Kryvyi in the Dnipro region as police were evacuating people from the area, injuring several civilians, including a child. Also yesterday, an attack on Zaporizhia city caused a dozen civilian casualties and damage to homes, a school, a dormitory, and other civilian facilities, according to authorities and our humanitarian partners. Following these attacks across the country, aid organizations responded immediately, providing affected families with emergency shelter kits to cover damaged windows, as well as first aid and psychosocial support. And we're following reports from Cuba after Hurricane Oscar made landfall there. The strong but slow-moving storm has generated significant rainfall in the eastern and central parts of Cuba over the past few days. The rainfall may increase the risk of flooding in both rural and urban areas. The slow movement of the storm, at only 4 kilometers an hour, will compound the situation, with more rainfall and potential flooding in the coming hours. We're aware of some news reports of the ongoing power outage and other related challenges. Under the leadership of the resident coordinator in Cuba, Francisco Pichon, we stand ready to support and mobilize technical assistance if needed. The UN Emergency Technical Team is activated and in touch with national counterparts. The storm is also impacting the Bahamas, where the UN is coordinating with local and regional authorities on any potential response needed. This morning, the Security Council held a briefing on the maintenance of international peace and security, anticipating the impact of scientific developments on international peace and security. The director of the UN Institute for Disarmament Research, Robin Geis, was among the briefers. And this afternoon at 3 p.m., Council members will hold a briefing on Ukraine, as requested by Slovenia and the United States. The Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia, and the Americas, Miroslav Yencha, will brief. And I want to flag that Elizabeth Spehar, the UN Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support in the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, is leading a high-level delegation to Chad from the 20th to the 25th of October 2024. The delegation includes representatives from Denmark, Finland, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. The visit will focus on the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund support to Chad, nationally and specifically in the East and Lac provinces. The delegation will observe the impact of Peacebuilding Fund initiatives funded between 2017 and 2024. Ms. Behar and the delegation will also meet with government officials. And you will have seen that over the weekend, we issued a statement in which the Secretary General strongly condemned the killings in Maputo of Elvino Diaz, legal advisor to Mozambican presidential candidate Venancio Mondlane, and Paulo Guambe, the legal representative of the political party Podemos. The Secretary General expressed his deep condolences to the families and loved ones of the victims, and he urged the authorities to swiftly investigate the killings and bring their perpetrators to justice. The Secretary General called on all Mozambicans, including political leaders and their supporters, to remain calm, exercise restraint, and reject all forms of violence ahead of the official announcement of the electoral results. And as a reminder, at 1:30 p.m., there will be a briefing here by the chair of the Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances, Gabriela Citroni. That's it from me. Are there any questions? Yes, Valeria first.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Farhan. So my question is on Middle East. According to an Axios report, Israel gave the U.S. A document last week with its condition for a diplomatic solution to end the war in Lebanon. And few of these conditions, which is like demand that the IDF be allowed to engage in active enforcement, and also demands that its Air Force have freedom of operation in Lebanese airspace, contradict the UN Security Council Resolution 1701. Do you have a comment on that? Do you have heard anything on this?
I wouldn't comment on ongoing diplomatic efforts, which are, of course, at a delicate stage. On 1701, of course, that resolution stands. If there's any need to change the resolution, that would be up to the members of the Security Council to determine. But for now, as you know, the relevant resolutions on Lebanon, including 1701, stand, and we want them to be implemented. Edie.
Thank you, Farhan. First, I'm sure on behalf of all of us, can you tell us why the briefing by the spokesman for UNIFIL was canceled, and if it's going to be rescheduled?
It is going to be rescheduled. Unfortunately, my esteemed colleague Andrea Tenenti was feeling ill today. He was willing to do this, but he really couldn't do it now. Once he's better, we'll try to have him brief.
Okay. My questions are, there has been almost no aid getting into, especially northern Gaza, Jabalia camp, and you said that the Israelis have canceled almost all but 4 convoys to northern Gaza. Did they give the United Nations any reason? And in light of basically Israel's statement that it isn't blocking aid to Gaza, does the Secretary General have any specific comment regarding this, and has it been conveyed to Israeli officials?
We certainly have relayed our concerns to Israeli officials. I'll just recall what I read at the top of the briefing. Among the things I pointed out is that the Secretary General calls for immediate and unhindered access for humanitarian and rescue teams to save lives. And also, to reiterate that what he said is that the violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza by all parties to this conflict are unacceptable. Yeah.
Did the Israelis give the United Nations any reason for denying all these requests?
I would leave it to the Israelis to explain their actions. From our standpoint, all of the missions that we have been sending have been thought through and have been carefully coordinated, and we urge that all missions have the access that are needed. Yes, Pam.
Thank you, Farhan. You read out the statement that we saw on video of the Secretary General to the COP16, where he talked about the need for funding and a resolution to the commitments. But as far as even the organizers say, about 80% to 87% of the commitments are not filled. Does he think something will actually come out of this COP? Then I have a second.
He is very hopeful that something will come out of this COP. The Secretary General is going to push, and he and other officials are going to encourage the parties to the COP come up with concrete commitments so that we can ensure that the biodiversity on the planet is protected.
And is there someone there for the Secretary General?
I'll have an announcement for you probably a little bit later on down the line.
Okay, wait, and I'm sorry, is Secretary General going to the Kazan BRICS meeting?
Announcements on his future travels will be later on down the line.
Thank
yes. Abdelhamid and then Deji.
Thank you, Farhan. I normally ask about what is missing in your briefing, and I ask you why. 61 Palestinians were killed since this morning in Gaza. And also the Aqsa Mosque was stormed by Ben Ghafir for the second day in a row. And yet I didn't hear any comment from Thor Swensland or the Secretary General.
Well, at the very start, like I said, the Secretary General unequivocally condemns the continuing and widespread loss of life in Gaza, including in the Israeli airstrikes in Beit Lahia, which killed dozens of Palestinians, among them many women and children. So that I said. Regarding your question about the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, what I can tell you is that the Secretary General reiterates the utmost need to uphold the status quo at the holy sites in Jerusalem, taking into account the special and historic role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan as custodian of the holy sites in
The
Jerusalem.
Indonesian hospital also, it was set on fire this morning. Are you aware of that?
We are aware of these reports. Again, I would refer you to what I said at the start of this very briefing.
My last question, if you don't mind. I mean, you've been calling again and again, asking Israel to stop the war, to allow humanitarian aid to go through, to respect the humanitarian law, yet Israel did not pay attention to all these appeals. What else the UN can do other than just repeating the same appeals?
We're not simply repeating the same appeals. We work on a number of diplomatic channels. If I'm saying this to you from this podium, you can be assured that we are working to push these messages across, not just to Israel and the parties in the region, but to all concerned countries. Deshi and then Maggie.
A couple questions first. Is there any consideration for the Secretary General to visit Lebanon recently?
I don't have any travel to announce there.
Okay, then a couple of UNIFIL questions. First, Israeli media reported that a former Danish UNIFIL soldier said that Hezbollah controlled all areas where the UN personnel could go in southern Lebanon. Do you have any reactions on these allegations or comments?
Yeah, what I can tell you on that is UNIFIL positions are for peacekeeping purposes exclusively. Our personnel have always shown themselves to be dedicated to their work in support of peace and stability in South Lebanon. Nonetheless, we will investigate any allegations that are based on credible evidence, but we have not, at this point, received credible evidence.
Okay, so my second question on UNIFIL. Just like you said, IDF bulldozer deliberately demolished no observation tower. According to Resolution 1701, the Security Council authorized UNIFIL to take any necessary action in areas of deployment of its forces and it deems within its capabilities to protect UN personnel, facilities, installations, and equipment. What kind of measures has the UN taken to protect its facilities there?
Our peacekeepers have been acting to protect facilities. Much of what we do, as you know, involves our liaison mechanisms, and we have been working to make sure that parties cease and desist any violations at UN premises.
You cannot protect, let's say, this observation tower. Is that because it's without your capabilities? Should the mandate be renewed to give more capabilities to the UNIFIL?
Well, as I said before about Resolution 1701, any changes to that resolution would have to be done through the Security Council. We are operating within the mandate that we have, and the peacekeepers have been working to the best of their ability, both to maintain their positions and go about their work, but also to protect their security and the safety of their premises.
One last question on UNIFIL. In the resolution, one of the mandates for UNIFIL is to monitor the cessation of hostilities, right? You just mentioned that so many violations of the airspace as well as the projectiles from both sides.
Yes.
So can those UNIFIL peacekeepers be witness if there's a, let's say, trial for war crime? Will they be able to be the witness there?
I don't think I'd entertain.
And what you said, will that be the evidence?
I don't think I'd entertain any hypothetical discussions
But-
about this.
but legally
Obviously,
speaking, can that be
obviously
the case?
that would depend on what boards of accountability are set up in the future. Yes.
Thanks, Farhan. A few follow-ups. On the denial of aid requests in Gaza, as I'm sure you're well aware, the Biden administration has given Israel 30 days to improve humanitarian access to Gaza, otherwise face consequences. Will the United Nations, other than reading it out here, will you be sending some sort of formal letter to the administration, the Biden administration, informing them of all these violations or denials?
We will be in contact, like I said, with all our interlocutors, trying to push forward the need for improved humanitarian access.
And then also the Biden administration's envoy, Amos Hochstein, is in Lebanon today. I was just wondering if he has any meetings planned, perhaps with Janine Hennis-Pleshert or any other UN officials.
I don't have anything confirmed at this stage. If I get more details on that, I'll let you know.
And then a separate one on North Korea. There are lots of reports and videos circulating in the last few days of North Korean troops headed towards Russia that are supposed to be deploying to Ukraine to help the Russians. Does the Secretary General have any reaction or comment on that?
We have no confirmation of this. Obviously, as you know, there is monitoring of the DPRK and the sanctions on the DPRK by the relevant Security Council Sanctions Committee. So if there are any violations, it would be up for them to determine.
I think that panel of experts was shut down.
Well, the panel of
The
experts,
correct one?
yes, but there's still a Security Council Sanctions Committee that deals with the issue. Tony?
Thank you, Farhan. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, submitted a letter of complaint to the UN Secretary General following the report on the right to food, which states that, of course, Israel is committing genocide through starvation, as per the report. Any confirmation that the SG received this letter?
I'll check whether the letter was received, but certainly if a letter was sent, it will be logged in due course, but I'll check whether it was received.
Just a follow-up question also on the same topic, because apparently the ambassador concluded his letter by requesting the Secretary General to retract the submission of the report to the GA and to publicly condemn the anti-Semitic illustration that appears in it. Is that something that usually doable?
These are reports by human rights rapporteurs. We will leave who are independent. And so we will leave it to the human rights rapporteurs to deal with the contents of their reports. Yes.
Thank you, Farhan. On the observation tower that was toppled today by the...
It wasn't today, it was yesterday.
Oh, it was yesterday, sorry. That was toppled. Can it be restored? Can it be rebuilt quickly, or is it gone forever?
I'm sure that anything that we can build, we can rebuild. But obviously, we need an end to these sorts of violations, and we need to make sure that there's no further attempts to attack different observation posts. Abdelhamid.
Thank you. I have a question on Western Sahara. Probably you had received this question before I was away. So de Mistura said that he's suggesting dividing the territory between the Polisario, Frente Polisario, and the Moroccan kingdom. So how true is this proposal?
What I can tell you is that the issue of a possible partition of Western Sahara came up in the course of the regular consultations of the personal envoy, Staffan de Mistura, with all concerned in the Security Council. That was last week. This idea, based on an agreement between Morocco and Mauritania in 1975, was raised by then Algerian President Bouteflika and presented by personal envoy James Baker to the Security Council in 2002. The personal envoy conducted due diligence on this option and concluded that both Morocco and Frente Polisario rejected it. For this reason, Mr. de Mistura noted in his briefing to the Security Council last week that the remaining options included the documents presented in 2007, respectively by Frente Polisario and Morocco. He said that he had reminded the parties of the call on them by the Council to expand on their positions. In this spirit, his message to the Council was that the time had come for Morocco to explain and expand on their 2007 autonomy proposal. Yes.
Farhan, on the same issue of the Western Sahara, Morocco has replied today that he is not providing any more details before the other part accepts the proposal. So there are no more details if the Polisario doesn't accept just the principle of the proposal. What do you have to say?
Ultimately, these are all issues that Mr. de Mistura brought to the attention of the Security Council, and it will be up to the Security Council to evaluate where to go further with this. Deji?
Yeah, just a quick confirmation. The Iranian foreign minister spokesperson said that Iran has warned the UN and IAEA about Israeli threats to attack nuclear facilities. And he said the Security Council must intervene in such cases. Just want to confirm whether the UN has received any notes or letters from the Iranian mission on this issue.
There's been communications from Iran on some of the issues involving Israel, and those have been circulated as documents. You can see those for yourself.
But not letters to the Secretary General.
I believe that there have been letters to the Secretary General and letters to the President of the Security Council over the course of this particular crisis. All right. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Is there a